Welcome to part 3 of our series on using Reason 10's grain. In this video, we're going to take a look at the oscillator section here, the mix controls, our filter, amp section, and the global play controls. To start, I'm going to go ahead and reset this device. And then I'm going to go ahead, click on the browse sample here, and then just bring in a simple sample that's going to work best for the topics we're going to be covering in this video. I'm also going to set our playback algorithm to tape, and this is going to function as a regular sample would. As I play up the keyboard, our sample will be pitched up and speed up, and then as I play down, the keyboard will pitch down and then play back slower, or the sample will pitch down and play back slower. Let's then start with the global play controls down at the bottom here. Now we have a pitch wheel for shifting the pitch of our sound, and we can also adjust the amount of range that's available to us here. By default, it's going to be on 2 semitones. So if I go ahead and trigger a key and then use the pitch wheel on my controller, we can hear how that's being shifted by 2 semitones. We can click, hold, and drag and raise this up all the way to 24 semitones, so we'll be adjusting up to 2 octaves in this mode. If I go ahead and play back again. So we can just click, hold, and drag to adjust here. We can also use the up and down arrows to adjust 1 semitone at a time. I'm going to control click to set that back to the default of 2. We then have our mod wheel next to that, which we can assign to control most any parameter within grain to add more depth to our sound. Right now it's not applied. We can see here in the mod matrix it's not applied to any parameter because we've reset our patch. But if I were to choose one from the presets up above here, I'll choose the grain roads there, and then we can see now down below we have mod wheel. Our source is being sent to the filter frequency as well as reverb amount. So if I go ahead and play back and then use the mod wheel, you can see the movement down below here. You'll hear the adjustment in the character of our sound. Okay, so just know that you can choose the destination or assign your mod wheel to any parameter by clicking on the destination here, and then you have a variety of options to choose from. I'm going to go ahead and then reset the device again, and then bring back our simple sample there. Now moving on, we have key mode. And this allows you to choose how grain will respond to your MIDI controller playing. By default, this will be on poly, which will allow us to play multiple voices or notes at the same time with a maximum of 12. Now, this amount of voices that we are able to play back is going to be set in the header up above here. Right now, it's set to 8. We can just click, hold, and drag to adjust that. We can also click the up and down arrows to change that one voice at a time. So then right now, while we are in poly mode, I can play back the multiple voices that you're hearing. And then below that we have retrig, so I'll go ahead and switch that. And with retrig, we will be limited to monophonic playback, or one note, one voice at a time. And each time you trigger a key on your keyboard controller, it will start at the beginning of your envelope as long as you have released the previous key. So even though we have 8 voices here, once we go into retrig, we're going to be restricted to monophonic playback. So I'm going to press and hold a key, press another, while still holding the first, and we can see that the playback arrow here jumps back every time I press another key, even though I'm continuing to hold the previous ones. Next we have Legato, and then this is going to function in a way that it also plays back monophonically, so only one voice at a time, but it will not restart the envelope if you trigger a key and continue to hold one that you've played before. So I'll go ahead and trigger a key while still holding. I'll add another key. And then if you, again, take note in the sample area here, just notice this playback head, I'm holding that key. I'll press another one. It's not restarting as we saw in the retrig mode. Below our key mode, we have Porta or Portamento. Portamento makes the notes played back have a glide to them, and we have the option to set this mode on or to auto. We'll start with on, and basically now if I press a note and while holding trigger another, we can hear that there's a bit of a glide, and we have a time here to determine the amount of glide that we have. So if I take that all the way up to make this really obvious, I'll press and hold a key, press another while still holding. I'll do that one more time. So even if you don't have a key, if you're not holding a key, when you first press that initial key, you're going to have that glide. And then finally we have auto. So the way auto functions is if I press a key, then we don't have that glide that we just heard a second ago when we were just set to on. Even when we press that initial key, we still had that glide. But then if I press and hold and play another key, we do have the glide. Okay, so the auto is we don't have the glide when we initially trigger, and then if we continue to hold and trigger another key, the glide is then, or the portamento is then introduced. So I'm going to go ahead and control click to take these back to their defaults. And actually I forgot to mention that the portamento works with all of the different key modes, but when you have poly selected, the voices that will glide will be a bit random since there can be multiple voices playing back at once. So we're in poly, and let's go ahead and turn the portamento on. And let's increase that time. So now let's go ahead and move on to the oscillator section. Here we have three different parameters. We have an area for setting the octave, choosing a waveform, and then a modulation parameter. And the oscillator section can actually help us further define and enhance our sound. If we take our current sample that we're using right now as an example, it doesn't have much low end, so we could actually choose a sine wave to add lower frequencies to our sample to create a fuller sound. So I'll go ahead and activate the oscillator. We're already on the sine. I'll lower the octave a bit. Okay, so we can hear how we have a much fuller sound when we activate the oscillator here with the sine on a lower octave. And it doesn't have to just be adding lower frequencies. We can choose these other waveforms and just enhance the sound a bit. And this is an area where you'd really want to experiment and take some time to get to know what sound you'll achieve by going through these. And in the waveform area here, we have a choice between sine, triangle, sawtooth, square pulse, noise, and band noise. And we can just click, hold, and drag up and down to change between those two. We can also use the up and down arrows. So here we've got our triangle, then our sawtooth, square pulse, noise, and band noise. The mod parameter here allows us to change the character of each waveform. So if we're going to take the sine as an example, let's just come back to that. I'll drag down. I'm going to set the mod to 0%, and at 0% we have a pure sine wave. But as we move this parameter to the right, we introduce a bit of a sawtooth effect on our signal. So I'm going to actually take the level of our sample down, our audio sample down, so that will not be played back. We just have our sine wave here. So right now we have our pure sine wave, and then as I move the modulation parameter, I'm going to turn the volume up just a little bit here. We can hear how that sine wave is being modulated and moves almost towards a bit of a sawtooth effect. So this mod parameter is going to change the character of the oscillator sound by adjusting the waveform or whatever we've selected. The best thing to do, again, would be to experiment here. It would take a bit of time to go through and explain each one of these, but if you want to know exactly how the modulation affects each waveform, then that is available to check out within the manual. But again, if we play back and then adjust, we can hear quite clearly a bit of what's going on here. So moving on, we have these level controls here, which I already adjusted to take down the volume of our audio sample. So at any time, if we'd like to do that, we can just adjust this level here. Moving to the left, we are taken to silence, and we can come all the way up to 6 dB. I'm going to control click to take that back to its default position of minus 3.3 dB. Now we also have control for the oscillator here. And again, we can take that down to silence all the way up to 6 dB. I'll control click. And then next to these level controls, we have several buttons that are going to allow us to bypass or send each one of these two signals through the filter or bypassing. So if we click the right arrow, then we will then send our audio sample to the filter. Clicking the up arrow, we then bypass and head straight to the amp section. And as for the oscillator, if we click the down arrow, we then bypass the filter and head to the amp section. Clicking the right arrow, we send it through the filter. Now in our filter section, we can choose between 4 different filter types. So if we click on this down arrow here, we can see that we have high pass 12 dB, band pass 12 dB, low pass, and low pass ladder with a 24 dB slope. We also have a frequency control for setting the cutoff of our high pass and low pass filters. This will also set the center frequency if we're using the band pass filter. We then have reso or resonance for controlling the amount of resonance at our cutoff frequency. And let's just go ahead and give a quick listen here. So I'm going to go ahead and click the right arrow to send this to our filter. I'm going to change this to a low pass so we can hear how we're cutting those higher frequencies out as we move to the left. Now if we increase the resonance, we're going to boost around that cutoff frequency. We can get a better idea of that as I sweep. If I were to take that resonance down, we don't get that sweeping effect. Okay, and then next we have envelope 2. Now in the envelope section here, we see that filter. These two are actually permanently tied together. So if I click on the filter here, we can see the envelope that's set and available for use with the filter, although we could choose from a number of presets there, or we can even draw our own envelope. And when we activate the envelope 2 parameter here, what we're doing is essentially controlling the behavior of our audio samples frequencies over time with whatever we have selected here in the envelope area. So if I actually click on the preset button and then I'm going to choose this preset, I'm going to take that sustain off, and then we are on low pass still. So we can hear the frequencies opening up and that resonance. I'm going to take the resonance down a bit actually. And I'm going to slow the time of this envelope down so we can get an even better idea. If I were to change this to high pass, take that frequency up a little bit, we should cut as time moves on. Okay, so the lower or the more to the left that we have this, we have more of the higher frequencies in our signal to then cut, which will make it more of a dramatic difference as we move forward in time. And we'll actually spend a bit more time on this in the next tutorial when we cover the envelope section here. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and take that back down. So next we have vel or velocity. And the velocity control lets us set if and how much we would like the velocity from our MIDI controller to have an influence on our filter. So I'm going to take the envelope 2 all the way back up again. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and take the velocity all the way up now that we've heard how that sounds in its initial state of being off at 0%. We are now at 100%. So I'm going to play softly first. And then I'm going to play back pretty hard here. I'm going to actually take the resonance down. I'm going to play softly. Soft. Okay, so we can hear how that is going to have an effect on the frequencies of our audio and take into account the velocity information that's coming in and how that affects our filter. I'm going to control click to take that back, as well as the envelope. And then finally in this filter section we have keyboard, and this basically activates keyboard tracking. It's going to be at 0% or off by default. If I go ahead and then so we can hear how that sounds as I play lower and then higher. If I turn the keyboard tracking all the way up, that higher pitch should open up in the higher frequency range. And our lower note is even more muted. And hopefully that may not even be coming up because my levels are barely moving here when I trigger the lower key. Let me raise the cutoff a bit. Okay, so that's at 100%. If I take that back down to 0 and do that again, you see how they're both the same. I'll go ahead and take that back up to 100%. So that lower key is really being muted because it's lower on the keyboard. And then the lower we go, the more muted it will become, and the higher we play, the more those higher frequencies will be allowed to pass through. I'm going to go ahead and control click to take that back. Now lastly, we're going to cover the amp section. And if you're familiar with synthesis or samplers, then you're probably very familiar with these controls. For those of you who are not, we'll just spend a brief moment here to give you a better understanding. So this is our amp envelope and its ADSR controls, which will allow us to determine how our sound, or in particular, its amplitude or volume, will behave over the passage of time. And ADR represents attack, decay, sustain, and release. The attack time is basically going to determine how quickly or how long our audio sample is going to take before it reaches its full amplitude or full volume. The decay basically sets how long or short it's going to take for it to reach its sustain volume after you press and hold that key. So when you press the key, you have your initial attack, and then while you're holding, it's going to drop down to the sustain level. And then when you release the key, the release slider here is going to determine how long it takes for the sustain level to go to silence. So I hope that all makes sense. I feel like it's jumbling up a little bit. So if we start with the attack, we have an immediate attack at 0 milliseconds. You can see in the display there. So our signal starts back immediately. As I increase this, say to 900 milliseconds, nearly a second, we can hear that we have a softer entry there to the audio versus all the way down at the bottom, that immediate attack. Now we then have the decay, which is going to determine how long it takes to reach the sustain level. So if I take the sustain level down really low here, and if I play back again, we can hear how that level remains higher when I set this all the way at 100%. So if I take that down low again and then raise our decay time, that's set to about 8 seconds. So actually let's make that shorter to about 1 second. We should hear an immediate decrease to this lower sustain. So as I raise the decay, it's going to take longer to drop down. Where are we at here? That's too long. Let's say 3 seconds. That's still too long. Let's do about 2. Okay, and then the release. So at 0 milliseconds, we can hear there's an immediate stop of our audio. If I take this all the way up, that's actually at 40 seconds. Then, you know, I've released the key and it's still continuing to play. And this is just going to play back. We're actually on forward loop, so that's just going to keep going there for the 40 seconds that we have set there. Okay. If I were to set this to 3 seconds, I'm going to press and release. I've released the key. Then after 3 seconds, we're down to silence. So then next we have gain. And gain sets the maximum level for the envelope at the height of the attack stage. And we can choose up to 6 dB down to silence. So at the height of our attack, this is going to determine what that level can actually reach. If I control click, the default is actually 0.2 dB. We then have vel or velocity, and this influences the gain level. So the thing to keep in mind is that when we're working with grain, we're working with individual samples. So if we were using a sampler that contained multi-sampled instruments, say a piano, when we play soft on the keyboard, it may trigger, you know, a softer sample from that multi-sampled instrument. Then as we play medium, hard, it's going to change the samples, and so the volume and timbre of the sound is going to change. But when we're playing back one sample, we're going to have the same volume no matter how hard or soft we trigger. By using the velocity here and then raising this up, then we're going to be able to adjust the volume. So if I turn this off all the way to the left at 0%, I'm going to play a variety of different velocities on my MIDI controller. softly and it's still playing at the same volume. Now, if I go ahead and take that velocity, amp velocity up to 100, I'm playing soft. And I'm sure you can hear in the mic my MIDI controller. Okay, so that's what the velocity is going to do. And then lastly, we have pan, which is self-explanatory. Okay, and we'll go ahead and stop here. This wasn't maybe the most exciting tutorial, but I still think that if you're going to be making use of grain, it's helpful to have all of the fundamentals down and know exactly how everything works, because you may encounter a situation where you're working on a song and you're just not able to do what you want, and that's because you didn't have a good understanding of, you know, some of the global play controls, or how the filter is going to work, you know, in tandem with the audio sample and the oscillator, and bypassing, and as well as your keyboard playback. So all of these things, the deeper you get into music production, play an important role. So I hope that you decided to stick through and watch the whole thing. And as I said earlier, in the next tutorial, we're going to cover the envelope section. This is actually going to be a pretty juicy video. There's some really cool things that you can do with the envelope. And I look forward to getting that up, hopefully in the next couple of days. All right, take care, guys.